There you go.
All right, welcome everyone to the Thursday, August 5th, 2021 Halliwell Review Committee. We're starting at 6:32. So first item on our agenda is the roll call. Mrs. Nigerian. Here. Mrs. Chartier.
Here.
Mr. Halliwell. Here. Mr. Savini.
Here.
Mr. Corvo.
Here.
Mr. Mayo. Here. Chair is here, and Mr. Simpkins and Mr. Gertin are absent from this evening. Second item on the agenda is to review the draft meeting minutes from June 15th and our July 24th sidewalk and public charrette.
Recording in progress.
I'm sorry, that's supposed to say July 15th, not June 15th. Everybody a minute to review those.
Make a motion to accept the minutes from 7:15.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Accept the site block minutes from 7:20.
Okay, we have a motion. And a second. We have a second. All right. All in favor?
Aye.
And then do we have a motion for the charrette?
I make a motion to accept the public charrette.
All right.
7/4/21.
We have a motion from Mr. Nigerian. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a second from Mr. Corvo. All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Next item on our agenda for discussion, review, and action, Weston and Sampson invoice number 7210989. Just from experience and hearing what the town council likes to see, I did ask Callan to break out all the different tasks and what percentage complete they are. So then that way everyone's fully aware of where they stand in as far as the invoice goes. So you'll just see the memo on the opposite side of the percentage complete. So if you have any questions, Carolyn's here to answer them. And if not, I would look for a motion to recommend this in payment of this invoice to town council.
Mr. Chairman, prior to doing that, can you just, I know it's not specifically agenda item, but on the 3% completion for the wetland delineation, is there a way to sort of push on that? Because I assume clearly that's going to have direct correlation on buildable, developable land. So as soon as we have that.
You should have it tomorrow. I was actually just reading it.
Is there any other questions?
Are you asking for a motion or no, this is just for general information?
We would need a motion to make the recommendation to town council.
Absolutely.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Great. Agenda item number 4, for discussion, review, and action, Weston and Sampson update on the public charrette report and the building assessment. I'll pass that over to you, Carolyn.
Hi, so I hope you all received copies of this item has the community engagement write-up. It's not, I wouldn't say it's a finished document, but this is also the template for the overall land use study report. So everything that we're producing will be in a compendium of the document that looks like this. And also you should have received a draft existing condition report. It's not complete. There's still quite a few pieces missing, HVAC and such. August 26th is the final report, drop dead date for everything to be into the report. But it's actually coming in piecemeal, so I'm kind of building it as we get it in. So that's some of the process right now. There is a piece outstanding, which is the market analysis. That represents a fairly good chunk of the overall project. And we actually don't have the subcontract executed right now because we need to kind of develop the scope of work if we're going to do that. So maybe that's something that doesn't need to be decided tonight, but we'll want to think about that so that we can include it in the final report. We had quite a few outcomes from the community engagement session. And we have our concepts being developed right now. We should have those in August 13th as our target date to have the conceptual alternatives to you. That will be an illustration of the possibilities that came out of the community engagement, sort of illustrated. And we're anticipating it sort of as a menu of options of things that we've heard so that you can look at it and go, okay, we like this part, we don't like this part. And then we will refine those for a second edition to be included in the report. So maybe that's a good driver for the market analysis. Maybe that alternatives, you'll see things out of there that you want developed in the market analysis. So that might be educational there. I also think it's not really in our scope, but I think it might be really useful add-on to this work is to develop a list of potential grant sources, because we do have a sort of a good list and a direction for some of the things the community wants to see. In order to understand financing mechanisms, it might be helpful to have at least a list of grant resources, other sort of contacts or information to know so that you have a next steps. That's a basic summary of what's happening. Are there any questions?
I've got a question. I read over the report on the condition of the buildings, and we know we've got asbestos, roof shingles, siding, flooring, etc. We've got bad electrical in every building. Nothing's ADA compliant in the restrooms, etc., etc., etc. I guess what I'm looking for is what is the condition of the actual physical skeletons of the building? Are they worth a lot of work would have to be done to be compliant? Or is the structural beams, are they in good condition or not? Because I didn't see that in the report.
Yeah, we have a separate analysis that needs to be refined a little bit better. And mind you, there's more to the structure than we are able to observe, right? You can't see some things until you open up walls and such, which was outside the scope of our work. My conversation with our architect in-house, his feeling on the issue for what that is worth is that buildings 1 through 4 are in really bad condition. The larger multi-use buildings, he actually thought were pretty salvageable. They were not in bad condition. It looked like they had ongoing maintenance. But it all depends too on, it's a cost benefit analysis, right? What is it going to cost you to rehab those buildings as they are? And what benefit are you going to derive, or what could be derived if you demolish them and build to something different?
Well,
And
I
that's
talked to a friend of mine who's in construction. And when I explained to him what needed to be done, he said, he said, if you have to upgrade the electrical, get rid of all the asbestos, reframe all the windows, reglaze all of it, the whole thing, redo your bathrooms, you said what it's going to take you in labor to do that work, you're better off getting a wrecking ball. What is your opinion on that statement?
I think that for many of those buildings, that's on target. I think for the gym in particular is the one I'm thinking of. I think that might have some bigger uses to consider. The other, I mean, this is just my opinion, and I'm not an architect, so it's just my feel on it. But I have done quite a lot of rehab work, and the reality is that these are one-story buildings that are all separate, and so it's not just the buildings themselves; it's the interconnections, it's the maintenance program that you're going to have to think about. Energy, is it energy efficient going forward? There's a lot of management operational issues to be considered too. Is that make it worth it for 1-story classroom buildings? For many of those, probably not.
Thank you.
So your concepts that we'll see on the 13th, how is that gonna work? Will they consider scenarios of you using some of the existing structures or?
So we're
Right.
envisioning 3 concepts, one of which uses all of the buildings. One of which does a partial demolition, partial retainage of the buildings, and one is a complete demolition.
Great.
Given what you just reflected upon from your architect's input, which would be valuable, actually building 1 and 4. Should we even entertain that? If it's not, if those are the 4 or the 3 structures that are in the greatest degree of distress and decline, should we even waste our money and your time developing a scenario that is highly unlikely to occur? I mean, from building 1 through 4, if they're at this point establishing from an architect's point of view, we understand structurals haven't analyzed it, but if the architect's reasoned opinion is there really is no use, do we want to is our money not better used disregarding those? We have to abate them no matter what we do. Even if we tear them down, the asbestos abatement cost exists. So
This is true.
that's a separate item altogether. We shouldn't confuse that when we're trying to analyze, renovate, or tear down. That has to go separate from the demolition, no matter what. But that's the only thing I'm saying, is it the best use of our money to play out a scenario on 3 or 4 structures that we know really don't fit the bill?
I would say that, in looking at those 3 options that Caroline's outlined, if buildings 1 through 4 are in such disrepair that it's not worth saving, there's plenty of site exploration items that they could put in place of those 4 buildings.
Okay, so that's why I'm bringing it up.
So I would still say that it might be worthwhile to explore the salvaging of all the buildings minus buildings 1 through 4 based on the architect's opinion.
No, I agree. So what I'm saying is, I thought I just heard her say that one of their scenarios will be to incorporate every structure. But that takes time and professional input. Why are we gonna go include 1 and 4 if at this point it's reasonable to conclude that none of those structures are worth saving?
I think you and I are on the same page.
No, I agree with what Bob just said. I think, because really, you're giving us 3 choices. One of them is automatically going to be off the table. So it really only leaves us with 2 concepts. So I guess what we're saying is, if I'm understanding, one of the concepts, just completely have one scenario and not even have buildings 1 through 4. And just have the remaining ones be as if you're showing us all the buildings are salvageable. You're just not showing us building 1 through 4, you're taking that completely out of the equation. And then you can resume with concept number 2 and concept number 1.
Part of the reason to do that is that that's valuable land.
Well,
Whether it's open
that's what
space
I was gonna
land
say,
or whether
yeah.
it's location of the structure, that would play in, and it's the best use of our money and your time.
Yeah, I mean, on our end, it doesn't, it's, it's all imaginary, it's all conceptual, it's not a lot of our time, but if we take those buildings off, as you say, it becomes valuable space, and especially as you'll see when we send over the wetland delineation, the wetlands are they're more scattered than I actually had thought. And they're sort of fragmented, so they create little pieces of developable land. You'll see when I send it to you. That means that all of the contiguous land that is developable is that much more valuable.
I'm under the impression that DEM is revising the setback. So that's going to be in effect whenever it is that we develop. So will your setback be the new or the old? It should be the new, right? Or what will be the new?
Well, these are conceptuals, so I don't know that they're gonna really factor in the setbacks per se, they're not gonna be that technical. Yeah, it's when you get to the next phase of design that you're really gonna wanna pay attention to those kind of details.
Has a full surveillance been done on the property, or are you just going on just an existing plot map.
You mean for wetlands?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, we had 2 staff members out on site flagging the wetlands, literally walking the whole site, flagging them. They did GIS mapping, so there's now an updated layer of this parcel with the actual wetlands on it.
Okay, I just had a comment. I mean, I think I was speaking on behalf of all of us who were there, for the chair and the co-chair and the Western Defense, and I thought that Saturday charrette was quite well run, where attendance at the middle school was certainly acceptable. I mean, it was a gorgeous day. It was a Saturday in the middle of the summer. Attendance on site was limited, but I thought the presentation was very well done. You engaged the people, they felt comfortable, they engaged you. And I thought it was good to just take a moment to say that we should be pleased with the way it was organized and the way it was implemented.
Thank you. So that's all I have until I have my next round of updates to send you, and that really will be some of the final documents that you'll see.
Yeah, great.
So did we come to a conclusion, the scenarios we're gonna start with? So
I think
everything one is 1 through 4.
it sounds like you have an internal deadline on the 13th. So our next meeting would be on our next meeting is on the 19th. So we would hope that you can come and present those at the 19th. And then we can have a discussion then, review, comment. If you could get those out to us a little earlier so I could distribute them so we can kind of take time to digest it.
Yep.
That would be great too.
Okay.
Is there a ranking of the buildings from like best to worst that we could probably look at to use as a baseline to form those scenarios? Because I'm thinking that with 1 through 4 off the table, right? Are, 5, 7, and 9 like the next 3 that are the next worst?
Well, I'm trying to think, we had talked about a ranking earlier on, and I'm trying to think of something that's useful for you and logical. And then there are other things that I like, I was mentioning to Jeff that I think a punch list for some of these of all of the things that would need to be done to repair it might give a sense of how much work is involved. And then for taking that from there and kind of framing it as a rating of some sort, I think would be good. We will try to give a range of costs too, which is in itself a rating of sorts, right? Because it's, quantifying how much money is going to need to be spent. So yeah, we want to give you like a rubric of some sort to judge the buildings. I'm not quite sure what that looks like yet. You guys kind of pull it all together.
Last question I have though is with regard to structural. So structural analysis is not part of your initial contract.
Structural assessment is, but it doesn't involve going up into attics and looking under the roof.
Well, I think what should be done is you should give us a reasoned opinion whether or not, to what degree that additional investigation is necessary.
Right.
The greatest mistake we can make is to march down a road and at the 10th, the 9th, or the 11th hour, come to the realization that structural decay is advanced to such a point that we would have changed our opinion prior to that point. So if we need to issue a change order, I'm just saying, if additional funds are needed, if chair accepts or if the committee accepts, maybe you make a presentation to say, this is what it would cost, and identify which buildings and what you would be looking at in order to establish the structural integrity of the existing building. Because if we don't know that definitively, it's a long highway.
To add on that too, I mean, again, this is gonna be a multi-year project, so one building that might be viewed as salvageable now may be in a different category 3 years from now. So we
Well,
also
the
gotta take
reason
that-
that decay just doesn't occur. It's usually a prolonged matter of neglect. So if we find that there's a reason for advanced decay, then abate the dang thing to stop it. And if that's an initial expenditure that's going to save us millions, then we know.
Right,
It's highly unlikely that if they do an analysis, if they find the reason, if there is decay, that reason can be abated. And and stop the decay, which would allow us to have the longer range perspective because we're not hurting us.
Let me just ask this, Karen. You mentioned a punch list. When I read through the condition of all the buildings, the punch list was pretty consistently the same for all the buildings.
Yeah.
Okay, so I don't know, you know, with the things that I alluded to in my earlier comment, I don't know if we really, I think that we all know they're old. There's asbestos, there's windows that are single pane, there's glass that's not. So that's gonna be the same. for
Yeah, you don't want the
I don't,
reputation.
yeah, exactly. So why go through and say, building 2 has them, building 3 has them, and which is what you did, which is fine. It's been done, I guess.
Yeah, and I obviously want the report to be as useful as possible. There's another aspect to this too, particularly for the gymnasium or the larger spaces in that, and I'm sure you're aware of this. If you change the use, right, if you make it an assembly use, that triggers a bunch of code issues such as sprinkling, and that is a substantial cost item. So, you know, it's a sort of like, you know, every time you make one decision, it brings on other decisions. So yeah, we want to make sure that we're focusing on the right decision points. Any additional?
Yeah, does anybody else have any further questions for Carolyn? I know we have we also have the asbestos report. So if anybody has any questions on that.
The thought I had was knowing that, a couple of things come to mind, knowing that this work must be done. No matter what happens to each and every structure, there must be abatement. Not knowing what this committee's broadest perspective is, but at some point in the near future, whether it's under their current directive or not, I would imagine it would behoove the town to start to get pricing on abatement. Because it's got to factor into any budget. It has to be abated even if you want to send the excavator over there to tear it down. You can't tear it down with asbestos. It has to be removed. So should we wait on that, or should we suggest either, if it's not in our line of authority, at some point we should probably send it up the ladder, proceed and say, should the town council consider, through whatever means you choose, throw it back to us or do it on your own and say, let's work with the professionals and start to get competitive pricing to do what we know has to be done.
Yeah,
When at least doesn't mean you have to execute. the project,
exactly.
But you have an order of magnitude.
Yeah,
It's
and
gonna be a big number.
I was thinking about this as well, and a lot of the projects that I've worked on that have to deal with hazmat abatement and everything. It's usually the owner's responsibility to do that before a contractor comes on. So I was thinking that, you know, in the next couple of weeks, next couple of meetings, that we start to think of putting out an RFQ or an RFP for services to get the hazmat testing done. So then that way we are positive in which areas, which buildings, all the asbestos is located. And then at that point, we could have we could kind of do one of two things. We could either have that hazmat report and a bid spec put together that could go out to bid for a contractor to abate it, or at least we could have, at the very least, the report and a biddable specification for when we do decide to move forward, that the spec is already written. The project manual to outline the scope of work is already done. We have that in our pocket and we just hand it to a contractor to bid. And then whenever, you know, the town is ready to do that abatement, they can go ahead and do so.
Would we not need town council's approval? Because I didn't know if that was
I think that would
beyond
be,
our reach.
no, I think that would be one of the recommendations that we would make to town council. And we could even, you know, make that recommendation tonight and just say that we will start working on a process for an RFP for hygienists to come in, do the testing, and we can outline the work scope and go from there.
I really think we should, because it's the first expense and it has to be incurred. It's council's decision as to when to incur it, but we we'd rather know what it is and have the three bids. They're gonna be all over the place. You're gonna have high and low. It's a very, that industry can go from the lowest to the highest, so the numbers will be broad, but I would strongly suggest it's in everyone's best interest to get on that sooner than later.
Bob, let me ask this question of you, because you have knowledge in the area. If we decide to tear down buildings 1 through 4, we still have to do something about the asbestos. There's gonna be a cost incurred there, even if we tear them
Oh, of
down,
course,
put them in a dump truck.
you cannot,
All right, so this study would be how bad are the conditions and what will it cost us to get to remove
what
the problem?
normally happens is you'll get a license.
Yeah, right.
Professional will come in, that person has knowledge generally of what used to be and what was back then, because there's no more asbestos in use.
Right.
But they're well educated, they know the glazing, the ECT asphalt,
Right.
the ECT itself. And then they will suggest and say, we recommend you take samples from X, Y, and Z. Buildings, run through every building. Then they give you a price per sample, and then they'll come back and say, this is what needs to be removed.
Okay, so,
Based on that, you go to the professional licensed removal people.
Yeah.
And they'll give you their price. They'll give us.
so if we tear down building 1 for discussion, there's still gonna be a cost incurred for that.
Correct.
Okay,
It has to be made safe before the demolition contractor can dispose of it.
So whether you tear down them all or you keep them all that is.
That's an expensive going to be.
They don't want asbestos in the land.
Then we did a riot. If I did it as a private contractor, it's just it's a mistake that you cannot make, and especially if you're a town that's supposed to know better. And if you've got professionals assisting you, it's a. has to be done.
Sorry, I keep going back to the scenarios. Would it be possible to get from your firm's opinion, a pro and con of each scenario as you lay it out? Instead of, I'm thinking about the punch list and feasibility of use of each building, but rather than that, maybe you could package it into a pros and cons of each scenario.
Yeah, I don't see that that's a problem. I mean, it's all subjective, it's just our opinion, but it's easy to put together.
Yeah, that's where I would caution us, is because that would be a very subjective opinion. And in building projects passed in this town, I don't want to have anyone thinking that we are guiding Weston and Sampson towards a result that we might feel is appropriate, but others in town might not agree with it.
See, I was thinking of the reverse where they would help guide our opinion based upon their expert opinion. They're telling us what the pros and cons are for each scenario.
I would assume that any concept art that is put out there would be, in my mind, is more of a, well, if you took these existing buildings, here's what space it may take up within that property. If you were to raise them, you could kind of think outside of that existing property. So we're not really beholden to what does it look like, what's the use, more of concept of where is it placed on the land using the existing building, where is it placed on the land not using the existing buildings, but maybe spreading beyond those boundaries. That kind of accurate?
Yeah, great, yes. So there's you can look down at an aerial and you can see schematically where land can be used. You have your wetlands, so we can illustrate trails and such, but there's a certain amount of upland that we could develop. But yeah, you're not stuck to that building envelope that was there. If you demolish the building, then you can arrange that plan or that footprint any way you want. We're tasked also with giving you a sort of 3D perspective as if you're walking into it. So it's not just looking down, it's looking at. And that's, again, it's schematic, it's just an idea, of say, for example, community center or something like that. That's where, aesthetics and that sort of thing, that's a little bit of artistry, but it's all just suggestion, so.
I think Scott makes a good point. We don't want to force the peg into this most valuable building makes their most valuable professional opinion layout problematic, then it begs the question, are we saving the building to prove a point, or are we going with the best design? And they may not be in concert. One last point that just dawned on me as it relates to structural integrity. We all know we're going to build something new, whether it's attached, detached. So we're gonna have different structures, different ages. I think one concern that we should have is to make sure that if we're going to reuse any existing structure, that we know from a structural engineering point of view, that that building will be as good as it is upon completion. 20 years later. The last thing we want to do is spend a boatload of money to incorporate a 40-year-old building. And then in 20 years, find that that 40-year-old building is not standing up at the time and that the new structures are. Then all we did was we just postponed the Band-Aid to another generation. And that may not be the case, but only the engineers will be able to make that. Or did reason.
I just want to point out something. I don't know if you guys were aware or caught it during the charrette, but if you turn to the mini charrette package, the second to last page is a aerial shot. Yeah, and you'll see if you kind of turn it sideways, right? So you're looking at the Halliwell property from a bird's eye view. The back right, if you kind of see it highlighted.
Yeah.
Kind of see it outlined. Weston and Sampson had mentioned to us that the parameters outside of that, not where it's kind of boxed in there. From what they were analyzing, that is all buildable space. That's outside of the wetlands zone. Yeah, that corner. Yeah, which if you look at it, that's almost as big as where the cleared space is itself. So we have quite a bit of land if you take that into account.
But does this reflect the updated wetland?
Yes.
It does.
Yeah, I'll send you the updated wetland images, I think tomorrow. I just have to verify that those are okay to go out. There's some pockets there, and the entry as you're coming in off to the right side, all of that appears to be upland.
The topography is workable.
Well, that's another matter.
Along the Green Street Victory Highway corner, there's quite a street right there. And similarly, on the north, the northeast corner on Victory Highway, that is also fairly steep topography, as well as, going up to Roselawn Avenue. There's a walkway there, but it's certainly Tom and I walked it a few months ago. It is a very steep, not ADA compliant pathway. So.
And lastly, we have no second means of egress and access, is that correct?
Not at this point.
Unless we enter private property. Well, it
Yeah.
discharges into private property. We don't have a second egress away from Victory Highway.
Well, it looks like Lucky Dog. It backs right up to that lane we're talking about the northeast corner, so you could, with their permission, get it right away and look at.
Like Village Haven and Lindy's too.
Yeah, right, exactly. I see the Village Haven, and the is to the left of that. Yeah, right, exactly. So there would be access from School Street to those properties.
If we got a right of way.
Right, exactly.
One of
By
those
eminent domain.
cooperative. Well, the other thing I would note, well, say, fire, one concern the fire department will have is a second means, whether it be limited to emergency vehicles, not necessarily a public road, but emergency vehicle access discharging onto private property if need be. So from a design perspective, you should at least entertain how that would be achieved with the fire department, and it's for everybody's safety. I just feel that in today's world, you're gonna have a remote location, and you only have one means in and out. It begs the question of, well, that's their job, you know.
Yeah.
They're supposed
It's
to-
enough shopping at Smithfield Crossing to deal with.
Well, exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
That makes it
Right, that's horrible.
I just had a quick question, maybe, like, all of this is really good what if, right? But I don't see in anything what your firm's professional opinion is to do with this. Should we rip it down? I mean, we can what if it all to death, but if in your professional opinion, we should just rip it down and start over, I think it's more cost effective for somebody to just say that.
So I think I'll pick this one up. I think what we have tasked Weston and Sampson with is giving us a menu of options of what we can look at. And then with those options, we'll bring that to the community, have a discussion, further discussion with them to really pinpoint what the community wants to see. So that's why we're dealing in big picture bubbles right now. And as we move the process along, we'll get a narrower and narrower scope of what we're going to do. So that's why this is a very conceptual stage at this point. So once we have Weston and Sampson's final report, we'll have all the existing conditions. We'll essentially have a lot of information that will help us and the town figure out how we're going to proceed at this point. So that, I think that's as far as I got.
Yeah, and in my presentation at the charrette, there was an example of a community that they loved the building. There are many people in the community that just loved this particular building. It was deemed really just too expensive to rehab, so they essentially tried to replicate it. But the community didn't want a replication. They really came out and they ended up having to save the building, despite the fact that it didn't make financial sense, just because that was what the community wanted to do. With many buildings, you can throw a lot of money at anything and save it. It's just whether it's worth it to you. And so that's, I mean, we can make recommendations on the structure and the safety, but we can't tell the community what it means to them. That's kind of that's why you all are here. So, you know, that's kind of where our job stops and yours begins.
Okay. Unless anybody has any other questions for Carolyn? We can move on to our next item for on our agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.
So for discussion, review, and action, visiting neighboring community centers. I sent this agenda out to you all. I had requested that you guys think about some potential other community centers that are in the area that we kind of field trip to. What I was going to recommend is that, you know, we discuss some of them, figure out kind of groups of 2 or 3 to go visit, take pictures, talk with the people that are running the centers, get an idea of what their process was of, if it's a recent community center, what their process was to kind of get to where they got to. I was going to say, you know, we could talk about, you know, building size, amenities and services that are offered, program or room types, when it was built, how they got some community input, kind of trying to learn from our surrounding neighbors and towns. So then that way we can make this a smoother process. So I don't know if anyone has done a quick Google search for community centers, thought about some that they visited recently that they'd like to go take a look at. And then we can start to talk about some small field trips.
Two that come to mind, obviously, the one in South Kingstown, that, we could certainly go take a look at. It seems to have a large gym space, multi-use rooms. I do know that the town of Johnson built a rec center, has some gym space. I'm not sure what else is available, like what else they built in there. But I can reach out to if anyone wants to go visit it. I know people in both departments can schedule something. Take a look. We can see what they did and see if it's something that would fit with us.
Johnson's just, three indoor courts.
That's pretty much it, just the gym.
You know, and there could also be places that look like the Johnson Rec Center that could have elements of what we're looking for too. So, you know, it's good to kind of cast a wide net and visit some places and just get a feel for how successful they are.
Sounds like South Kingston, right off the bat.
Well, that's the one,
Is the one that impressed the members of the committee who have been there. So, I mean, that's a no-brainer. Maybe we just have to, because you can't rule out Massachusetts either, or even, it's just right over there, so.
South Kingston has a pretty extensive website too, and it showcases how they offer programs to their residents and at what rate, but then also to non-residents and at what rate. So it kind of shows how they drive revenue.
Mrs. O'Hara.
Yes, on my way to my sister's that way to Concord, etc. There's been a lot of senior centers, I know, that haven't been there for so many years, built. I call it the extended ramp, that's very long. I guess it's a small town like we are, that was affordable. And then during the 70s, I ordered it, and I went to most senior citizens they were out. And even at that time, your friends in Kingston, which they had converted, believe it or not, from the area, that from all time was in the forefront. If it's okay with you, I would really like to stop because I've been by them now. And I can't believe that. I had to go to one small town, which isn't populated maybe in a small town. It didn't come from the country. And Sydney, how it was funded, what they have to offer. Is it solely for seniors, or is it used as a community center? If you want me to, I'll still stop and then I'll take it and tell you. But they look inviting. Every time I went by, whether it was early in the morning or late around the daytime, there are vehicles there. It seems to be really broad.
Yeah, that would be very helpful.
Well, it's North Providence Food and Fitness, so that might be something, just local that we could stop in and take a look at. The only thing I was thinking as well, I know we had written down the Lincoln YMCA, McCall YMCA in particular. The other ones you might want to take a look at, which they rehabbed them probably about maybe 10 years ago, was the Hockomock YMCA's, one in Franklin and one in North Attleboro, South Attleboro. But they did a phenomenal job kind of resurrecting those and doing a lot of cosmetic upgrades. And I know since they've done that, the community has used it quite a bit.
My kids go to the Lincoln YMCA. Really, they're a great pool there. I'm old, so the YMCA when I was a kid, that's when you lived, when they were unemployed and things like that. That's not the YMCA today. Okay. Is the YMCA a privately run organization?
Yes.
Would they be interested in putting a YMCA potentially on the Halliwell property? You know what I'm saying? What I'm saying is, if we had somebody who was in the health business, they could put up something that would be good for the community and profitable to them and income to us because they're going to pay us a fee or whatever, that would be the problem, just kicking them out.
You can't rule that out. I
Yeah,
mean, it's forward thinking. It doesn't mean that that's the only use.
no,
It would
no,
be a complementary,
exactly, but that could give you your pool, which people wanted.
which
You
we
know,
can't afford. to do.
meeting rooms, which people wanted, and it would be done privately, potentially with income to us, and then we can do our trails, and we can do our dog park, and we can do a lot of other things. And they can also, with a stipulation, that there be a senior center there that is to be used by seniors.
Well, I think we're probably getting off the center rail a little bit, but if you were to do that,
Yeah.
and there's no reason not to, our job is to be creative.
Exactly.
So that's a creative thought, in my opinion, but that would probably, to get support, if that were to even come close to fruition, you'd have to have our own structures that would then complement that as a second use, which would greatly increase the overall use of the property. So depends on how forward thinking people want to be, but I mean, that's why we're here.
Yeah, I just would.
So a Google search for me kind of got quite a few hits. So I'm just gonna list them off. There is the Whitten Community Center in Whittensville, Massachusetts, just north of Uxbridge. That is run by a nonprofit organization. There's senior centers in Smithfield, Lincoln, and Cumberland. We already mentioned the YMCA in Lincoln. There's also a community rec center in Burrowville. The Bay Spring Community Center in Barrington, which is also another nonprofit 501c3. There's also the Buttonwoods Community Center, West Warwick Senior and Community Center, and then a rec center in East Providence. So
I travel through Whitensville on a regular basis, so I'll stop by, take some pictures. That's, to me, it's part of the community center.
it is the Whitten Community Center.
Yeah.
WITIN. And then again, the thought of having just some smaller groups going to visit these is, I don't want to inconvenience any of these other places that we might visit with public meetings, and so I figure we can kind of disperse,
Less than.
visit, yeah, we can go disperse, go and visit, and then bring back all the information that we found and chat about it too. There is a community rec center. But the way, when I was looking at it, it looked like it was just a big open event room with a kitchen attached to it. It is, let's see, 200 Clear River Drive in Oakland. Tom, have you been there? Being a resident of Barnwell? 200 Clear River Drive. The Community Rec Center in Oakland. Yeah, that's
Wow.
Need a new DPW center, which is the recreation. located, the offices.
maybe the Google search will just say that.
Yeah, that's.
They had a website, either that or the town of Barnwell hasn't updated their website because they showed a big event room with a kitchen attached to it, so.
I'm looking at all of these others are talking about.
Oh, okay.
I'm just checking that.
All right, so let's see.
I mean, that Smithfield facility, I've never been inside. It's a very attractive looking building. It's a beautiful facility.
Yeah, that's the new DPW. So
Okay.
it's a bar.
Yes,
that off
I
the
think
list
so.
then.
Yeah, visual look of the structure. So worth something to stop about. I think we have to be careful, though, Mr. Chairman, we're public meeting, but it's a secret. It appears pretty clear that overwhelming percent of people at that meeting were in favor of a senior / community center as the primary idea.
Exactly. Yep.
So I don't think we're off base by doing this, but we also don't want to give any people that are listening the impression that we thereby ruled out all the other.
Oh, no, certainly not.
Very clear that the overwhelming support was
Yeah.
a multi-use youth and senior and general and functional.
Yeah, and I think part of it too is for us to be a little bit more knowledgeable about what's going on in surrounding communities. So we might not be duplicating efforts. You know, if we're gonna want to have this become a revenue driving machine, we might want to make sure that we're offering something that's unique to our space, unique to Northern Rhode Island. So then that way, people are more tempted to come to North Smithfield as opposed to, well, you know, the Lincoln YMCA has an Olympic-sized pool, North Smithfield has an Olympic-sized pool. We're gonna go to Lincoln because it's just closer. You know, it's kind of trying to think of, you know, seeing what successes they've had, maybe replicating some of those successes so that we can, as a town, have those successes, but also have something that might be a little bit more unique.
I think the value is also the overwhelming response was, or the very strong vocal response was for some kind of senior center, some kind of building for them, to look at different buildings throughout the state. That there are some communities that have a completely dedicated senior center building, separate from their rec center, their community center. There's other communities that probably merge the two together and have a blended building. So to look into each of those options and see what works for us as far as land use, and pull from those different ideas. That looking into those will give us an idea of, I think, where we can head.
So I'm gonna just go down the line with everybody. Rob, you said you'd like to visit the Witten Community Center? Okay. I'm letting you pick.
Right, what about Matt's? What about right up in Matt's in the, like, Easter Franklin area?
Yeah, that's fine. If there's one that you know that you want to go to,
I'll find it.
okay.
Franklin's gotta have something.
I'm sure they do.
They just have a gorgeous new library that they completed a few years ago. Not plugging my company. Frank, how about yourself?
I'll go to something.
Okay. Steve, you have a preference?
There's no Black Island, is there?
Yeah.
Ballards. Ballards acts as a kind of a community center,
Just pick one. And I'll go. Whatever's left over.
right? Do you want to do North Providence?
That's fine.
Since you seem to be familiar with that. Okay. It's gonna go.
I think he said it was the DPW.
Yeah, I think they haven't updated their website for Barlow yet.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's all right.
Something said there was a woman.
Yeah, on the website, yes, but if it's been updated, it's yet to be determined.
Technology.
All right, I will investigate whatever Borough has got, go for it.
Okay. And then,
Why don't you check out Smithfield? Why don't you check out the senior center in Smithfield?
Okay, I'm gonna Smithfield. Good.
all
Yeah, I
right.
saw that, I looked it up online.
It's Deerfield Park. It's not bad.
They got a great senior center
Yeah.
that just built last quarter. I think it's fun.
Mhm. Yeah, Smithfield, Lincoln, and Cumberland all have senior centers. So I think I might take a trip down to Barrington to see the Bay Spring community.
You want me to take the Cumberland one? Senior center.
You did this, right?
You want to pair it with Frank and go to South Kingston? Since you have the connections?
Sure.
Okay.
I'm still looking for it.
Okay. Yeah, use Tom while we still have him.
Tom. Borough. It's DPW.
Yeah, what was the question, sorry?
There was something that someone saw in Borough, it was a room with a kitchen.
Yeah, that's what I saw online. I don't know if
That's,
it's.
we're trying to solve that mystery.
All right, I will call the town and find out where their centers are. And what the,
Yeah, they always use Boston, Stephen Center,
Boston?
right next door, yeah, that's where all, a lot of the Marvel seniors will frequent that one.
All right, Boston.
Okay, well, we have two members that aren't here tonight, so we can, if we want to take a vote and send Chris and Tony someplace, we can.
Well, let's share your send it where you want.
Okay. Yeah, Chris had made mention that they'll go wherever we send them, so. You might regret that decision.
I think we should keep in mind too, when we look at these, because someone said, right, the size of the community and their ability to fund something. I mean, Frank is a pretty, I think that's Frank. Better than 20,000 people, isn't it, Franklin? So that's a pretty upscale community. So.
I think like Jeff said, if you can get a conversation with somebody asking and how they funded these things.
Yeah.
32,000.
32,000, so yeah, we're at 12,000.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's not apples and apples. So you should be remembering that. That's why I was thinking the boroughs, Boston's, you know, maybe Lincoln. South Kingston, a few people too.
So maybe that's, one of the questions
But
that,
Uxbridge then, that's what I was just thinking, what's demographically, what's other towns that are similar to us?
Right, exactly. That's what I'm trying to do. Doesn't mean we can't shoot for the stars, but we
Yeah.
should be realistic.
yeah, Waynesville's in Uxbridge, so
Good.
Northbridge. But it can be one of those questions that, the conversations that we have with, whoever is hosting us, that we talk about population size, and then that way we can, I know when doing libraries, we have to have a library size to be accommodating the population that it has. So a library in North Smithfield will be much smaller compared to a library in Providence, just based on population size. So it could be one of those correlations that we start to pull when we ask about building size and the population.
Yeah, it's interesting, I just Googled Whitensville's got 7,200 people. And that community center had a pool in there, in the school. It looked like a mini, it's long, I've never seen anything like that. It looked like an era, like this era school with a pool.
Yeah, I thought that one was very interesting. And then, and that one was also interesting to me because it was a nonprofit, so it's not on the agenda, so as we talked about, partnering with some folks, but we'll put that on the next one.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Does anybody else have any other thoughts about if they want to, maybe visit two, or, or is everybody kind of good with their assignments? Maybe we set a deadline for our first September meeting, that if everybody can take some time just to go out, and then it's our September meeting. September 2nd would be our first September meeting, so that might be a good time to kind of come back and report to everybody. Okay.
I mean, I assume that what our intent here is for each of us and to then share with each other observations, if we have pictures, and if then others want to go with less than three. But ultimately, we're pushing this all over to the designers to say, this is what we saw in Mendon, this is what we saw in North Providence, that really happened to like, architectural detail or functional detail, not whatever it was. And then let them kick it around and say, oh, okay, we understand this is, but again, we are only us.
Yep. Yeah.
So we're just giving them what we saw out there, and then they're taking it and conceptualizing it, so.
Yeah, and it's also for us to kind of relay that we're doing our homework with the community as well. So we can be able to have that, an open discussion with them and say, this has worked well in other communities, so that was on, that it was a prevalent thing that came up in our surveys, so we'd like to, look at how Barberville has been doing X, Y, and Z a little bit more closely, so then that way we can kind of replicate that success.
Well, the other thing is maybe as an agenda item, if you want to consider it, whether it's the next meeting or afterwards, we should probably have a discussion about how we would format a second survey. Once we whittle down what appears to be the direction that the townspeople who have participated are leading us, give more detailed information based on the professional inputs, so that we have incremental interactions with the community, so that they never feel out of the loop, but more importantly, that we don't go astray.
Yeah.
And we may find that by the third survey, more people are now realizing that, oh, this isn't just a pipe dream, they seem to be actually moving forward. We may find that we get differing opinions. We'd rather know those opinions and the force of those opinions before we get to the idea of even talking about a referendum or whatever the legal methodology would be to
Yes, sir.
assign dollars to it. So I think it'd be nice if we're already thinking, using Chris's mind to forward think, how many surveys he, based on his professional background, might be beneficial to us.
So I think you're segueing quite nicely into our next agenda item. Because I think, again, part of that outreach that we are continually wanting to do is, once Weston and Sampson completes their 3 options, it's going to be falling around the time of the Pumpkin Festival. And I'm thinking that way we have 3 presentation boards of those options. And we invite people to come and chat with us about them. It can be similar to the dots that they were doing during the charrette. If there's one that they prefer, they come by, they can throw a dot on it, say this is their preferred option. And then that way we can start to, again, reach out to everybody, hear what people are thinking. They're going to be out at this event. And it might be that we have another community event with or without Weston and Sampson, and just explain, here's Weston and Sampson's final report. It has all the existing conditions, so people can understand why buildings 1 through 4 have to be demolished, or something like that. And then we'll have all the information there to present to them, and they'll be able to make an educated decision on which way they'd like to see the community go.
I think though, in light of that, as we start to think forward, maybe Steve, at some point, either the chair and the vice chair should sit down at a town council meeting and kind of script what the next phase for this committee would be. Does this committee evolve into another committee? Or, because at some point, incremental decisions would need to be made, and I'm assuming we've always just pushed that up the ladder. But I think it would be good to get real feedback as to how you guys are envisioning how this goes from point A to the shovel in the ground, and in what methodology that's going to be. At some point, somebody has to decide, this is what we're putting on the bond referendum, this is what we're doing. Good, bad, 50 people like it, 100 people hate it. We don't want to wait until the 11th hour to say, oh, we should have thought of it. That's all. I just want to make sure that the seniors, or the leadership is conceptualizing how this is going to play out. So we have harmony. We don't want dysfunction. but we
Yeah,
want
so,
harmony.
so maybe what we do is, when we get to that point, whether that's 6 weeks from now, 8 weeks from now, maybe we could look at doing maybe a joint session, joint meeting.
Just a brainstorm, call it a workshop or whatever passes the legal muster.
Yeah, or at least giving maybe, because, I'm updating town council every meeting, kind of early on, and I give them an update on what we discussed the week prior. I take notes and put them into more solid ideas of what we talked about. But it may not be a bad idea if we did a joint session with town council, so that if they have any questions, they're asking those outside of just me.
I think there's a step in between though, and I like your idea of the survey and engaging the community. And I'm wondering if there's a way to package the 3 scenarios at a high level with that pros and cons list of each, the community to get their feedback on each, and then ultimately, what would they be, would they vote on a referendum for each scenario?
Ultimately,
That's the problem, right? And then we take that data, we share it with the community, come back to the town council, say, okay, these are the scenarios, this is what the community thinks, and this is the direction where they would want.
nobody could ever fault transparency,
Right.
like frustrating. I hope that.
Would there be any misconception or that the community would perceive those to be the only options if they were to vote on them or have a say in them? I'm just wondering what the feedback would be from the community. Is that's not what they were envisioning. I don't want it to not say that we should do it, but proceed cautiously with it. We don't want it to be perceived as these are the options that we are putting out there when they are strictly a very basic, very early stage conceptual design of what the property could look like.
And I think that would all have to be laid out, explained in the survey.
Yeah.
This is hypothetical illustration purposes only. This is going to help narrow the focus or direction. But also input from the community.
And I also think Jeff and Bob's point, who brought up weeks ago, that Pumpkin Fest is a hands-on. They're not sitting at the computer, scowling or smiling, whatever their opinion is. They're standing there talking to us saying, that's a great idea, this one, I like that. And then they're giving us feedback, real in-time feedback.
Yep.
That we can then say, well, we didn't just arbitrarily do this. We reached out, and this is where we are today. If we get overwhelming negatives and say none of these 3 make sense, then yeah, of course,
Yeah.
but at least we're saying to them, at some point, we have to move past theoretical.
Yeah.
And zoom in.
Yeah.
And I think the Pumpkin Fest idea, it's a perfect chance for us to just 2 hours each or whatever. we're gonna do.
And in discussion with Carolyn and Tom, when Carolyn had asked us, materiality of what these buildings are gonna look like, and I said, don't even go there. Just do theoretical 1-story blocks, 2-story blocks, 3-story blocks even, if, for your conceptual designs, because we haven't had a community input on what these building or buildings are gonna look like. So just, do boxes, and you can make boxes look kind of pretty in some conceptual renderings, but it's really, we're still very much at a very high level right now. And we're gonna, as I've said, we're gonna be listening, and we're gonna be having multiple more meetings with community input. We're not the one and done kind of deal. So, Pumpkin Fest will certainly be one of them. If we have to have one of our Thursday night meetings as just an open community forum where folks can come in and talk to us, then that's what we can do. And, that's kind of how I want to make sure that we're accessible to everybody as much as we can be as a 9-member board. And that means that, one of us is frequenting one of our many local establishments, and somebody grabs us and says, hey, I want to talk to you about Halliwell, then we take 5 minutes and listen to them and just talk with them. If we're out grocery shopping or out walking around, and you see a neighbor out, you wave to them and start up a conversation with them. There's lots of opportunities for us to be able to gather input. So I like to think that we're a pretty friendly town, so just wave and say hello. If not, if you have new neighbors, introduce yourself, and go from there.
You think it's possible, I don't know if I know kind of talked about, I don't know if we solidified it, but is it possible having a table at Pumpkin Fest?
I think so. I don't think that's gonna be a problem to get it, because Chris was gonna work on that. I think there was a cost associated with it, and Paul had said shouldn't be a problem to pay the $25 for a table. I think the only.
No senior discount, where Jim asked that from.
So I think the only thing in that regard would be that we probably just look for a tent to pop up, because Pumpkin Fest.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, canopy tent, so. All right, just going down, going through with everybody for, I know we did some outreach for some communities. I know for the Conservation Commission, we were tabled because Chris had something come up, so he wasn't able to attend, so it's gonna be the next meeting. Planning Board, I'm gonna be discussing that with the Planning Board next Thursday. So we'll be getting some input in that regard. Has anybody else reached out to their department, their perspective?
I met with the fire chief last Thursday, so it was very productive, very nice. Just a few reactions. I encouraged him to encourage the membership to participate in the survey. They missed it or the next time. But, one significant issue was, that's why I brought it up to Carolyn, is we all know, any of us who, children went there, they used to have that emergency path that discharged into either village area or windows. So they would want to incorporate that as an emergency access road unless there's a better means, so that there's second egress into that facility, just with an eye towards public safety, especially if we're going to have mixed use of multiple functions and people from different locations. And the second, there's two other things. I had raised it to him because I was going to float it to Weston Sampson, the idea that maybe in their design, we should consider, after talking to police and fire, if they wanted an office, so that if there was going to be a public event there, they could put an office for the police, where if they wanted to have many larger cities and towns have satellite locations, where if there's a big function, they could put an officer there, just so you know the officer's there. Or if the fire department had an extra rescue, we give them a garage or someplace that is, even if it's just one room, where if they wanted to attend and it's a big event, they knew that they were pre-staged to be right there, up for public safety. That could be in the design if we wanted it to be. And he also was considering the idea, he didn't rule it out, but I'm careful what I say, he didn't say it publicly, but he didn't rule out the idea that it would be an concept to possibly put a station there to kind of anchor it. Again, that was just conceptualizing. It's not by any extent a formal decision of any kind. It was just general discussion that, it's not a bad location, but, and then it would anchor that facility that you have, especially if it's a senior center, best use it right there. So they're positive about it no matter what, but the key would be that second piece.
Okay. Does anybody else have any other updates with their respective boards? Okay. Well then, I am going to go off script for a moment and take a second to publicly thank Mr. Kravitz for being a spectacular town planner for the past 5 years. So you will be greatly missed. But I certainly wish you the best of luck down in Warwick. And I also have other choice words that I can't say publicly for you. So with that.
I second that.
Perfect, great. Unless anybody else has anything else for the items on the agenda, I will be looking for a motion to adjourn. All right, we have a motion to adjourn. We have a second. All right, we have a second. All in favor? We are closed at 7:46. Thank you very much, everyone.